Does a leader create the culture that they are a part of, or the other way around?
Leaders, absolutely. Not just an individual, but a leadership team, definitely the top team, absolutely shapes the culture. There is no doubt about that.
In your experience, Renee, what's a common thread in so-called effective leaders that you have worked with?
I think that's a key question because I could tell you many leaders that are influential, but they're influential through fear. People will follow from a place of fear, though you're not going to get as much productivity out of them. You're not going to get the best out of them. They aren't going to stay.
How should I go to that person that I've always considered as a threat to me? What should I be communicating to him or her?
When you're not used to that emotion in the workplace, it can feel a little bit shameful. Leading with more heart or being more embodied is not just something that feels good, it creates business results. It creates more effective leaders. More effective leaders create better business outcomes. Absolutely tied to it.
Hey, Renelle, thank you so much for joining in. Such a pleasure having you here on the podcast, the xMonks Drive.
Thank you, Gaurav. I'm so happy to be here.
Pleasure is all mine. How have you been? It's been quite some time that we connected last.
Yeah, last time we talked that we were getting ready for US Thanksgiving and I was traveling to do some training and some work. So
Yeah,
definitely have been busy and fulfilled. How about you?
I'm doing very well. We had the festival season in India. We are just entering the winters in the country. And soon, of course, it's a downtime for everyone all over the world. But yeah, God's been very, very kind. No complaints. God's been extremely kind.
Ah, good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. Renee, let's take a dive into this episode. This episode is really special for me because just for everyone's benefit, we are going to dwell deeper into three important concepts. One is the impact of culture on a leader. The second one is how to manage stakeholders. And the third important aspect we're going to talk about, positional power as well as personal power. And if you look at as a leader, it becomes really crucial for you to manage your stakeholders, to look at how the culture is impacting and then show up from a space of personal power rather than positional power. Now, the question is, are you even aware of that? So, Renee, you have worked with two of the big four companies in the world before you gotten full time into leadership development and consulting work. Help me understand, what are your key learnings from your tenure while working with two of the big fours that you still cherish and that continue to fuel you, inspire you today as well?
Yeah, great question. Well, I started working for the big four consulting firms when I was 22 years old.
Wow.
So from day one, I was put in front of executives. And I think learning to be in front of leaders that so many years ago were, I guess in such, in such executive, powerful roles, I really learned a lot about leadership and about how to be around leaders and how businesses work early on in
Mm,
my career, as well as being able to see multiple types of businesses and leaders. So
mm,
I will always value that. I think it accelerated my career and my understanding of business.
mm. This has always been a big question mark for me, that how do young professionals, as you mentioned, you started your journey when you were 22. I mean, how do you guys manage to deal with senior professionals, and that too in multidisciplinary environment that you have to operate in? How do you get so much of information about different cultures, different industries? How to deal with that? What kind of training do you go through?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can tell you what I think people need to go through. I can't tell you that everybody gets it, but I think one, there's a lot of onus on a leader
Mm,
to be very open to younger, people that are newer in their career, to be open and curious, because those people also bring something to the table. On
mm,
the other hand, there's something in a less experienced worker. It's not always a younger worker, but a less experienced worker, to look people in the eye, to ask
mm,
questions, to have a curiosity. And
mm,
I think that right there, with the dual role of a leader being open to that and asking questions,
mm,
and then a less experienced worker also doing the same.
mm, 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 mm. Renee, let's take one step forward now. You said 15 years back, you switched over from working with Deloitte's and the E&Ys of the world to where you gotten into your leadership practice.
Yeah,
What was that trigger for you? I
yeah,
mean, why would you leave a big four and start something of your own?
yeah. There's a few reasons there. One reason was I um, got an executive coach when I was, I don't think it was in my early 30s.
Hmm,
And it was such an impactful experience for me. It was what really took me to the next level in my own leadership. And I knew that that was something that I wanted to include in my practice. And at the time, the firms weren't doing as much, they weren't offering as much executive coaching. I think that's different now.
yeah.
The other thing was I still really loved organizational change management and strategy,
Hmm,
but I kept seeing over and over again that it was really the leadership and the people that would make or break some of our process changes, the communications. And so I really wanted to focus on that part of strategic change.
hmm, hmm, hmm. And Renee, having worked with organizations like Deloitte and E&Y, and now you have been a practicing leadership development consultant and executive coach where you work with leaders from all across the world. I've always found that culture has a huge impact on the leader. But at the same time, I personally feel it's a chicken and egg story. Does a leader create the culture that they are a part of, or the other way around?
Yeah, that's a great
Right?
question.
What's your take on this?
My take on this is that leaders absolutely, not just an individual leader, but a leadership team, but
Hmm,
but definitely the top team absolutely shapes the culture. There is no doubt about that. And it's not just how the top team works together,
hmm,
it's how each individual person shows up, responds to crisis, listens, asks questions, and then you bring that all together, and that formulates the culture. And
hmm.
the culture has a really big effect on the brand. So
Yeah.
what's happening internally is then reflected to what's happening externally, which
Hmm,
is really similar to a human, right? So what we're feeling inside, or our mindsets inside, are then what reflects in our behavior outside.
yeah. 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 Hmm. So what I'm listening is that the top leadership team in any organization has a huge impact on the culture.
Yes, absolutely.
Let's talk about a particular case here. Let's imagine this gentleman who's working as a CEO in an organization, but has the principals sitting in some other part of the world. Now, that
Mhm.
organization, the principal company sitting in the US or somewhere in Europe, they have a particular culture as well.
Right.
Now, what do you think? What is it that a leader can do sitting in the country in India? What is it that he can pick up from what's happening in the US, filter it in a way that does not impact in not so positive way the culture that he has been instrumental in, she has been instrumental in creating in their own country.
Right.
How to balance that? I think that's the dilemma that I've come across. So many leaders who face this.
Yeah. I can pull on some experiences when
Yeah, would
I've
love to hear.
yeah, been in a global change leadership position where we're working with 20 and 30 different countries at a time. And I think there's a couple things. The first thing I have to get really clear on is, what are we trying to create?
Mm,
Are we creating a centralized global organization, or are we creating a global organization that's very regionalized?
mm.
Um, and how just knowing that alone is really, really helpful.
Hey, that's a
I
powerful
don't,
question. What are we
yeah, just,
creating here?
yeah, what are we creating here?
Yeah, yeah.
Because perhaps someone in, let's just say the leader is in India and a region is the US, but the global headquarters are India.
Mm,
Perhaps I assume as the US person that we're going to keep our US culture, or
mm,
I assume that we're going to be changing our culture. Like, we need to be really clear on that. We can have a strategy and then we can localize it for, hey, this strategy works in the US this way, but
mm.
this strategic activity is not effective in India. And so we need
Yeah,
to do it a different way, but yet it's the
yeah,
same strategy. We're just
yeah.
activating it differently.
This is so appropriate, right? Something which is working in the US may not work in the country. So the question that I need to ask myself as a leader is, what am I creating in the country? And if it's not in alignment to what is expected from me, then am I willing to challenge myself and thereby challenge the global strategy? Now, in this case, managing stakeholders plays a very vital role, Renee.
Yeah.
While I'm managing the stakeholders within the country that I'm operating in, it is imperative for me to manage my global stakeholders, right?
Hmm.
How, what do you suggest should be the line of action in terms of what kind of information sharing should be there, what kind of compliance one needs to adhere to, what kind of governance I need to bring in the country, how should I manage the power dynamics that might be happening? Because people sitting in the global offices, they have their own needs while serving my stakeholders within my country.
Well, first of all, I would say I wish we would change the word from management, because we're not managing stakeholders, we're partnering and co-creating with our
Yeah.
stakeholders. And if we can take that view, that that yes, I might be in a leadership position, but we're in a knowledge-based economy, and there are people that I need to co-create, co-create with and partner with in order to
Mm,
realize our strategy. So I think that just that mind shift alone makes a really big difference. And I think going back with what we started with is the curiosity. A leader, while we may have, even when we're developing the strategy, like, let's
mm,
have a curiosity about those people that we're partnering and co-creating with. What do they
mm,
think? Um, how are the messages landing? What do they think would be most successful in activating this strategy? Let's be transparent. And if we can't take their suggestions, why not?
mm,
And the other thing have seen a lot is that there's lack of two-way communication. So the global
mm.
team will send out messaging, but there's no feedback mechanism for,
Yeah.
was that brilliant messaging? Did that land? Is that working?
Mm.
And so as teams can become more curious and then more agile, of like, let's hold our plans loosely, and adjust and listen and get curious.
Wow. Would love to hear one of those experiences from you, Renee, because there are a couple of things that I picked up from this conversation right now. One is when you mentioned that, what am I creating as a leader? What am I creating in the country, right? That's one. Second thing is what you spoke about, and I just loved it. It's not about management. It's not about stakeholder management. It's about co-creating. It's about partnering with your stakeholders, whether they are sitting within the country that you are a part of, or if they are sitting in some other part of the world. And the
Right.
third thing that I've picked up is the two-way communication. What kind of communication channels do we have? Because in case I'm operating from a space of co-creation, if I'm operating from a space of partnering, I can't afford not to have communication channels, because otherwise my assumptions are going to rule what I am doing and what I'm not doing. Would it be possible for you, Renelle, to share one such example where lack of communication, two-way communication, or lack of partnering became the biggest impediment for this leader and thus became a reason for the downfall, not only for the leader, but for the organization?
Yeah, great question. I might shift to a different leader that I worked with once. Was a really brilliant chief technology officer at
Mm.
a healthcare technology company. So that the chief technology officer was a really key position, just brilliant technically. And there was
You
a
know,
lot of
I'm smiling because currently I'm working with a CEO of an organization, a CEO of a technology company. And it's a real case that I'm sharing because this person is finding it difficult to manage stakeholders sitting in the US. Because while they are sitting in the US, there are so many dynamics happening. They have
yeah,
their own need to control what's happening on ground in the country. And here is this star performer who has offers from different organizations. And he's saying, let me just stick to it. Let me just stick to the organization and clean it really well so that we can grow as an organization.
yeah, absolutely. So in this particular case, what he was doing was just not working, even though
Mm,
technically it was right on. And so, the hypothesis on the table was there's communication issues with this
mm,
leader. And
mm,
so as we got to know each other better, we dug in. What we realized was really happening was more about kind of a lack of self-awareness a little bit, as well as a lack of like an achievement drive that was actually overactive. And so it wasn't, so this person was coming across as not being a good communicator and not caring. And so people were not responding. And what was happening actually was that he cared so much that he was actually working too hard and
mm,
getting in the way of other people really doing their job and shining. And when he started to realize that,
mm.
that's what it was. And so then he was actually promoted, I think 6 months after we were done working together. And we knew he wasn't working specifically on communication. He was working on empathy and his
Yeah,
achievement drive. And that made all the difference. And suddenly the results they were getting. So then they had his technical expertise plus his ability to mobilize people.
yeah,
And so before then, it felt like a one person show for everyone. And that was never his intention at all.
yeah,
It was just sometimes you can care too much and you get in the
yeah,
way of the results.
absolutely. Absolutely. You know, as I often share with people, your yesterday's strengths would become your areas of development in case you don't regulate it well. And as
Yeah,
you mentioned, it's important to challenge the assumptions one is operating from. And that's exactly the conversation that I'm having with this. And
right.
as you mentioned, what am I creating on ground in the country? I think if I can only go back to that question and revisit that the power dynamics are happening in the world or in that office because of their need for control. Now,
Right.
the question is, how can I partner with them? How can I co-create with them? You know, when you are talking about Renelle, that individual did not have the challenge with communication. It's just that he was over caring. He had empathy, which came across as if he's intruding other team members. How did you manage to build awareness for that person that probably he's overdoing something?
Things that I have found or that I found are really effective is one is my absolute favorite developmental tool is the leadership circle. And so it
Mm,
is a beautiful developmental tool that people complete themselves. And then you ask a series of people around you to complete
mm,
that kind of helps us see where we might be overusing and underusing strengths, but also gives us some developmental pathways to be
mm,
more conscious leaders.
mm, mm, mm,
We can see blind spots, we can, all of that. But I also like to interview about 5 people just personally. Yes, I can read comments in a survey, but I also like to just interview and really understand the energy. When people talk about someone, you can really feel and sense what's the energy that they feel and that they're expressing towards you. And a curious leader will be able to take that feedback and say, huh, some of this feels good, some of this doesn't feel good, some of this feels true, some of this doesn't feel true, and get really curious about it and start to experiment.
mm,
And I think that's what makes the difference. It's not about, hey, change this. And then you never don't have experiments. You don't try little safe to fail experiments. You just ask someone to change and they don't really know how. But you try to start to point out, this is what I'm seeing. It's
mm,
different than what you see.
mm.
Let's experiment a little bit.
Yeah.
And then you said something earlier about the assumptions. And I think, that is so true, but not everyone understands the assumptions that we're carrying around. And so the best process that I've used in the last 10 years is the immunity to change maps,
Yeah.
and just helping people really get under the surface of like, I have this goal, but I keep not doing it. What's under the surface that's driving it,
Mm,
that I kind of put my foot on the brake? And it's usually some type of assumption or fear that we're not even aware of. And once we become aware of those, that is the key to change.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Renee, I love it when you spoke about immunity to change and the hidden commitments that Keegan has spoken about.
Right.
In your experience, Renee, what's a common thread in so-called effective leaders that you have worked with?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think I don't want to repeat the term curiosity over and over, but the people that are willing to be introspective and get really curious and also really understand how their story impacts the behaviors and the assumptions that they bring. And to be able to look at, wow, this strength is what got me to where I'm at. And in order to get to the next place, there might be some overuses of this that I
Mm,
need to let go of, and I need to move on. And so it's those people that are really understand
mm,
that one, our story contributes to how we show up, but also understand that it's the deeper work as a leader
mm,
that
mm.
takes us to the next level. It's not necessarily if I go get a technical training
No.
about how to communicate perfectly that I'm going to be a better leader. It's about if I do the deep inner work, that's where the jumps in effectiveness.
Mm. What I'm hearing is one, they are genuinely curious about anything and everything that's happening around them. And the
Yeah,
second one is they are willing to look deep within and um, revisit their own narrative, the story that they have been living their life from, and check if that's serving them or not serving them. Is my understanding right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in your experience, Renee, what are those primary challenges that leaders come to you with? Recently, I had this opportunity to interview one of the most successful startup entrepreneur in the country. And I asked him out of curiosity, what is it that you have been dealing with? And what, according to you, is the most difficult task for a leader? And without blinking, he said, Gaurav, to tell you the truth, when I started working, it was challenging for me because it took me some time to figure out the areas that I would like to create and establish myself as an entrepreneur. After some time, he said, I'm pretty intelligent, so it did not take me a lot of time to understand the technicalities required. But I think if there's one thing that I've found challenging and difficult is dealing with people, identifying good people for the team, uh, developing people, making sure that they stick to the organization. Would love to hear from you when you're working with diverse industries, what, according to you, are the difficulties that leaders come to you with?
Mhm. Well, I would say a lot of times on the surface, people would come to me with culture issues, retention,
Mm,
profit, like those things that what does our organizational structure look like? All really, really important,
mm,
but those are more process changes. And so usually when we dig in, what we're usually finding is again, it goes back to, oh, there's something first within me or us, because a lot of times it's the leadership team. I think it's much more effective to coach both individually and in a team so that
yeah,
you're getting both individual shift and team shift.
yeah,
And so, and then when you go interview people that work for these leaders, it is generally, are they, do they hear me? Are they, are they too harsh? Are they controlling? Do they, they're just too busy, so I don't want to come to them. And that's the things that you generally hear. There's no trust on our team.
mm,
And so in order to then to get back to the original question was retention and culture might be what
mm,
they actually come to you with. You go all the way back to, wow, how am I showing up as a leader? And then how do we show up as a leadership team?
mm,
And
mm,
so I see kind of, it seems to be two sides of the spectrum of certain leaders are just not, they're giving away their
mm,
power because they want to be liked.
yeah,
And that's not creating the environment that people
yeah,
need. On the other hand, leaders are trying to control too much and be too perfect and not make mistakes. And it really gets in the way of
yeah,
relationships and it gets in the way of trust. But
yeah,
so does being too nice and not speaking up.
yeah,
And so once we get some of that managed, then suddenly we're starting to shift trust. And then we're working on strategy and retention.
yeah. Three words that resonated with me while I was listening to you is one is retention. Definitely, that's one of the difficulties. One of the most challenging tasks for any organization is to uh, have less attrition. Thus, retention becomes a very important point to consider. The second is you spoke about trust, and the third is you spoke about culture.
Yeah.
And in my limited understanding, while you're talking about that leaders need that control, they have this need to be liked by people, and thus they find it difficult to release that control.
Mhm.
One another word which is coming to me is influence. What kind of influence do you have in an organization? Because that's going to determine the kind of trust that you'll be able to build in the culture that you spoke about, and thus will have a high retention in the organization. What, according to you, are the traits of people or leaders with high influence in the organization? And how do they leverage the power that has been bestowed onto them?
Good question. Well, I would say we can be influential in two ways. We
Hmm.
can be influential because people are scared of us and we
Yeah.
influence through fear, or we can influence through inspiration.
Hmm.
People are inspired by how we make them feel, by the questions that we ask, by our
Hmm.
vision. And so that's a form of influence too.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so it comes down to what type of influence do I want to have and do I want to make? And I think that's a key question, because I could tell you many leaders that are influential, but they're influential through fear.
Yeah.
And so I think a much more inspirational and powerful way to be influential is understanding the tie to a business to larger societal impact. That's
Hmm.
inspirational.
Hmm. Hmm.
People want to follow that. That's influential. People will follow from a place of fear, though you're not going to get as much productivity out of them. You're not going to get the best out of them. And
Yeah.
if when another opportunity comes along at an organization that feels more inspiring, they aren't going
Yeah.
to stay.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Renelle, for sharing what you just shared. If you speak to any leader and if you talk about these traits, I doubt if any leader would tell you, no, I don't want to implement that in my life.
Yeah.
And yet, most of the leaders struggle. They understand these concepts at the cognitive level. And yet, when you talk about these concepts, they might say, I don't want to talk about this woo-woo stuff. Tell me where the profits are. How can I impact my top line, bottom line, and provide better ROI to my stakeholders? What is the possible pathway that could help us to translate this cognitive understanding of the vision, the higher impact of the society, the care, the curiosity, the questions, and the listening part, and transfer that where the person can embody and imbibe in everything that we spoke about?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, we need to present the business case that actually is there,
Hmm,
that this quote unquote woo woo or leading with more heart or being more embodied is not just something that feels good. It
hmm.
creates business results. It
Yes.
creates more effective leaders. More effective leaders create better business outcomes.
Yes.
So absolutely tied to it. So that's I mean, and we've got data that we can show leaders that really need to see
Hmm,
that. So
hmm,
that'd
hmm,
be one of the first ways to get there. But
hmm,
to actually get there, there's also this thought that, well, that takes longer to ask questions, to be
hmm,
curious, and
hmm.
it might take longer at the beginning, though the results you get in the long term are far better. And so if you think, oh, I'm going to have some short term inefficiency by asking more questions, by taking in more feedback, but what it's going to give me is much better longer term results because I'm
Yeah.
focused on outcomes, not the problem. And so if we're constantly just reacting to the problem,
Hmm,
we're always in that firefighter mode and we think we're being efficient and effective, and we're really not. If we take a little more time on the front end and ask some questions,
hmm.
really build our relationships, the outcomes that we're going to see are far more effective in the long run.
Yeah. 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 And it takes a lot of time for people to understand that, because the need for control would not go away so easily. You'll have to experiment, you have to take risk, you have to question, you have to challenge the assumption that you have been operating from. And as Renelle, you spoke about those hidden commitments, right?
Yeah,
That's not going to leave you so easily.
right.
Yeah.
Well, that's we have to make friends with those. A lot of
Mm.
times when we start to discover some of our fears or our unconscious beliefs, then we think, "Ooh, that's bad. That
Yeah.
has to go away. That's not a good part of me." And
Yeah.
what we resist persists, right? So if we start seeing that as these are bad things about me, they have to go away, or bad
Yeah.
things about someone else, they have to go away, that's not going to happen. We have to also make friends with our fears,
Yeah.
make friends with our hidden commitments because they're there for a reason. There's some kind of protection they're offering us.
Yeah.
And so we need to understand.
It reminds me of another conversation that I was having on this podcast. And the guest said, you have to tame it, you cannot kill it. Another
Ah,
guest said that you have to meet your fear in the cage. Just go there, go inside the cage and meet your fear.
yes.
And you never know, that fear might be your best friend. That fear might be supporting you in several shapes and forms. It's helping you to cope in the world that you have created in your mind. I personally believe that with power comes responsibility. Now, you mentioned that you can have that influence on people from a space of fear, or you can influence people with the way you connect with them, the way you talk about your vision and the impact that it has on the larger society by the care that you express, the questions that you ask, and the listening that you offer.
Yeah.
What are the symptoms that you have recognize in a leader who is operating from positional power and is creating a culture in the organization which is not empowering?
Yeah, well, a lot of times you can feel it, and and that's right there. Is you just I can walk into an organization, I can even
Mm,
get on a Zoom, and I can just feel something that there's not connection. There's either a wall, a protective
mm,
wall, or this is about control. And that's then we need to get underneath that. But I can generally just feel it, and other people can feel it too.
yeah.
And so that's kind of the first clue. And then we need to start getting into, okay, what's happening here and taking a look at some of the results. I'll tell you that some of the more controlling leaders, they get like okay results. And so they like, why would I change? Like,
Yeah.
I get okay results. And it's like, but what if you could get even better results and you also felt better?
Mm, yeah.
Because running around and leading with that kind of control is exhausting and
It
stressful.
is. It
And so
is.
you could let go of some of that as well as get even better results. And so I
Mm,
think making the case and helping people see kind of that cognitive place that you're talking about, but understand that feeling different as a leader, then that reflects on the entire culture and everyone
mm,
feels different and we have better results. It's a win-win.
yeah. One is, as you spoke about the energy in the organization. The moment you enter, you experience that kind of energy. You experience that invisible wall, that wall of protection.
Yeah.
And the leader might say, "Hey, I'm getting these results. Why do I need to switch over from positional power to, let's say, personal power?" And I'm okay with that, right? What if you can get better results? That's a question, right? Another question to be asked from those leaders is that how is that serving you,
Yeah.
right? And what if you can get better results, as you mentioned, Renee, and feel better as well? Now, what are those ways that could help a leader to build awareness around the power that he has been operating from? And what are those actions that they can take that will allow them to step in the world of personal power rather than sticking to positional power?
hmm And I think once a leader starts to recognize that, sometimes that's the work right there.
Mm,
And that there is just a lack of self-awareness. There's so much numbness,
mm,
and we actually have to get the awareness there. And there can
mm.
be a lot of emotion in that. And
Yeah.
that can feel, when you're not used to that emotion in the workplace, it can feel a little bit shameful. And so we've got to really work
Mm,
like those feelings are like this isn't shameful. This is like this is real. This is a different kind of power that I can bring to the table. And once, we start with that awareness, then I think it's about small experiments.
mm,
Um, and it's about, building trust and doing small experiments and bringing people into, hey, I'm trying to make some changes here. I'm going to try this. Can you give me some feedback along the way? Because it's a very new way to operate
mm,
when someone's making that shift. Though I would say that at their essence,
mm.
that's really who they are. And they just haven't felt like they had permission to show up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we just have to do small experiments and not just,
Mm,
okay, you have to go from this to this suddenly more vulnerable, open leader. Like that's not going to work.
yeah.
It's just too much
You know,
change.
as you use the word vulnerable and open, Renee, I'm just wondering, uh, it's not easy,
Mm,
isn't it? It's not at all easy. And I'm just asking, wondering, questioning myself, what would it take for me to step into a zone where I'll take those small risks? Uh,
mhm.
how should I go to that person that I've always considered as a threat to me? What should I be communicating to him or her? And from where can I find that courage?
Yeah.
So I've got more questions than answers, Renelle. Not good.
And I think that's beautiful.
Mm,
I think when we have more questions than we do have answers, that's the work.
mm,
Like
mm,
that's the
mm,
transition. And when we have more questions and answers, at least for me, I feel things in a different place. I felt the
mm,
energy in our conversation shift, and my sense was that your energy started to move into your heart. And you
mm.
were just coming from that place, and you were using more of your personal power as you actually were reflecting that you had more questions than answers. And that felt more powerful to me than you having all of the best questions or answers.
Yeah,
I felt
yeah.
inspiring.
But this is like destroying the machinery that has helped me deliver results. But then, the act of creation begins with the act of destruction.
Yeah.
But it's fearful. It is fearful. And
Yeah.
we'll have to start from somewhere for sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Renelle, let's take one step forward, if you may. What I'm listening is that it's important for us to question ourselves and
Mhm.
look at, am I operating from a space of control? And thus I'm creating my influence, and influence is the right word. If I'm creating the influence in the organization because the positional power,
Yeah.
or am I operating from a space of purpose, as you mentioned, the vision, the care, the questioning, the listening part? Where am I operating from? And what am I here to create in the organization, as you mentioned, right? And then co-creating, partnering, bringing in empathy while dealing with stakeholders. In this complete realm of what we are talking about, what do you think? Where would you bring in the connection that I have with my own self?
Mm.
Where would you place that?
I mean, I think it's absolutely one of the most important places, because the other
Mm,
thing that will see leaders do is
mm,
just start beating themselves up. Um,
mm,
and and so that shows up as behaviors that continue to be controlling because underneath they're just beating themselves up
mm,
for needing to do something different, for not being vulnerable enough, etc. And that doesn't really do us any good either. We've got to have that
mm,
compassion of like, wow, there I go
mm,
again. I'm overusing a strength. And I think that has made a big difference
mm,
with my clients is these are strengths. We don't want you to
mm,
give up. If you're really good at a balance sheet
mm.
and seeing the numbers and how the profits come, that's good for the business.
Yeah.
Let's do that and open up a little bit, explore relationships, explore
Mm,
connection more. It's not either or. It's a both and of like,
yeah.
yeah, like you're great at cash flow and all that. Let's keep that. And let's add something else. And I think that also gives that permission of, oh, I'm not doing everything wrong. Because no one is doing everything wrong. We're all just trying to expand and grow even more, especially in a more complex world.
Mm, mm. Thank you so much, Renelle. I think it was an amazingly beautiful conversation. Thank you for being so generous and sharing uh, the wealth of wisdom and the experiences that you have. Such a pleasure having you here.
Thank you. And it's really fun to talk to you. I don't feel like we're a world away. I feel like we're in the same room.
That's what the fun is, and I think that's the beauty when we interact with somebody who's living what they practice in their life. I think thank you so much, Renelle. And I've always found your work so fascinating, and all the common friends that we have. People have huge regard for your work. So thank you so much, and I look forward to interact with you again sometime soon. Take care. Stay blessed.
Thank you.